Hey, and welcome to the first ever episode of Quiz to Whiz. I will be your host this time. It's Tim Aiken. I'm their solutions engineer here at Qualtrics, and I've got with me Susie Bowen, our Whiz.
Which
Um,
I am not the whiz here. Tim is the whiz,
oh,
or
she's absolutely just humbling herself. We had this idea for this webinar series, mostly for our existing customer base, right? We wanted to give you guys an avenue to be able to ask, difficult questions, things that you didn't know how to do or couldn't quite figure out how to do, and get people like us to sit down and figure it out for you so that you didn't have to. And so that's what we came up with. Quiz the Whiz. You guys will submit questions to us. Anything that you've ever wanted to try to do in Qualtrics, anything you feel like you might want to stump us with, send those over to us, and we'll have some info about that here in a second. But send those over, and we will try our best to get those answered. And when we sat down to do this, and had to come up with a name, had to come up with an idea, and Patrick, one of our coworkers, he's a huge inspiration to Susie and I both. He loved this show, Car Talk, and they do a Stump the Chump episode. And we very much think that we are chumps. And we thought that's a great name, but we can't use that because it's trademarked and all of that kind of stuff. So, um, Susie, you want to kind of dig us into
yeah,
how you came up with this one?
yeah. So this was not actually what I came up with, but my husband. I pretty much just said, "Hey, we can't use stump the chump." Tim and I are going to be our normal dorky selves and want to help people out. And he just came up with Quiz the Whiz. So then we started realizing as we were typing Quiz the Whiz back and forth that we were continually spelling whiz differently. So we did a little Googling and looked up what is the correct spelling for whiz. So we are using the noun here, the informal person who's clever at something. And obviously, we do find ourselves very clever, as you can tell by the uh, informality of this entire
Yeah. Yeah.
webinar
And
series.
And full disclosure, this is the second time we're recording this because we accidentally used the verb form of this earlier and could not put that out. So, yes, this will be a very informal discussion. Susie and I will mostly just talk back and forth about how we recommend things. And we think it should be pretty fun. So hopefully you guys enjoy it, and we can, get you guys some good info. Um, with that, though, of course, as you guys have ideas and as you listen to this and you're like, oh, well, I would love to see Tim and Susie try to tackle this thing. Use that email address down there to send us some other topics. Nothing's off the table. If it's something that you want a workaround for, you're not sure how you can do that, great, send it over. If it's a workflow idea and you just want somebody to build it, send that over too. We'd be glad to take those on.
Yeah, we
Uh,
definitely want to have fun with this, and we want to, we've got things that we're interested in, but we certainly want to make sure that we're helping you with those things that you get stuck on, or just whatever it is you want to make something even greater that you've already got working. We're more than happy to help you out. So let us know.
Yeah, and with that, let's go ahead and get started with our first ever question.
Sounds great. So we'll start out with a question, or a couple of questions actually, that we got from Leah Ray from Lucidian. Thank you very much for asking us these questions. We really appreciate it. Um, she mentioned that they have multiple operations within the company, and she was struggling with really understanding how to handle responsible parties and permissions and security and how they all work together to get the right people notified at the right times when they have tasks to complete, when they just need to be notified that something happened, and really all how all of that interacts and how to set that up within the system. Today, we're going to mainly focus on the workflow side of things, but we'll talk briefly about how this relates to documents as well. And we'll kind of dig in starting with differentiating between security and permissions and how those work together in Qualtrics, and really just best practices for how you're going to set up your system with that.
Yeah, and I actually love this question because it's a common question, especially for people that are just starting off, because there's so many possible configurations that you can have, especially on the workflow side, that it's just difficult to know exactly what's doing what. So I love it. Let's dig in to this demo system to kind of show some of not only what's happening, but then some of our best practices. Um, so before we start, I do want to give a little bit about how this site itself is configured so that you can see that. This is just a demo site. It's fake information. So what we're doing in here is just going to be an example, if you will. Um, it is designed, though, to look like we've got multiple companies within one company, right? So we've got an overarching company that has a quality management system, and then individual laboratories like a forensic one, an environmental one, and a manufacturing company, all within this one system, right? And all we're doing is controlling what people see with view and edit permissions on folders and then on the workflows. As far as groups go, um, pretty basic setup. You'll see that we've kind of done a pretty similar thing with the document setup as we do on the groups, where we've got like a cannabis lab manager and our cannabis users, and then environmental lab manager and our environmental lab users, right? So just a couple of basic groups that divide people up into what they need to do. We then have a director of quality who's over all of that. And that's what I'm logged in as. So that's Ryan, that's his role here. He is the director of quality, and he has, of course, full administrative permissions. Not there, of course, because why would a demo go? Why would this go perfectly all the time? It's over here in the system admin section. He has full administrative rights to the entire system. So keep that in mind when I'm logged in as Ryan here. View permission and edit permission doesn't apply to him, right? He's got the permissions that override all of those settings. So Ryan, when he logs in, gets access to all documents and access to all workflows, right? So when you're doing this, if you're a system admin, you're going to have the same setup. So it's important to either have some type of a testing login that you can use, or a way to check what you're setting up with some other type of a user. We'll show you that with workflows on how to turn off those permissions if you want to see it. But yeah, other than that, that's how we've got it set up on kind of a high level. And then all of the other settings we'll talk about as we dig into each of these individual things. So we'll start first by looking at two types of workflows. One that's used by an entire company, so everybody in this Qualtrics system needs to use, and then we'll look at one that is only used by one of the sub companies. So, and that could work for not only companies within a company or sections within a company. If you're a lab and you've got sections within, where it's the same concept, right? DNA would need just one workflow, but everybody uses this other type of workflow. So we'll start there, Susie, and I guess we'll start here with a corrective action one.
Yeah. And I think in general terms, when you're setting up your user groups, we're not going to talk too much about this in here, but just a quick note that it's good when they don't have any permissions to start out with, like Tim was talking about, where Ryan's got, everything, but you've got groups in there who have no permissions whatsoever. We're going to take that kind of extreme view right now to talk about when you have no permissions for someone, and we're doing everything really just through security. Versus permissions. But there is one permission that we want to call out, and that's the alter all workflow instances permission, because there is a setting on these workflows where there's a checkbox for alter all workflow instances permission. And if you have that, as Ryan would, because he's got all the permissions, that allows him to do everything, like Tim was saying. So this overrides essentially any security that he's got for workflows. But when you're testing a workflow and you really want to see how it looks for your general users, it can be really helpful to turn that off. And that's what that checked box means, is that even though he's got that permission for this particular workflow definition, when he's walking through instances of it, he can actually see it as a user. That permission's sort of null for this particular case. So let's talk a little bit about permissions versus security in general. And if you've been through any trainings or talked to me previously, you've probably heard the key analogy from me, but it's really just like having two sets of keys. One gets you in the front door, the other one sort of gets you into your inner office. And without both keys, you can't really get to do the function you need to. So, you know, they sort of play on each other. And we're going to, like I said, we're going to be talking more about the security aspect of it than permissions. So we're going to just assume that people have no permissions in this case. So let's talk a little bit about terminology and the difference between definitions and instances. So I'm going to start with definitions. As far as Qualtrics, the terminology here, when we're talking about a workflow definition, we're talking about the whole behind the scenes, everything to do with a corrective action. So it's the procedure, it's the policy, it's the, you know, the process, the steps, the form that would be associated with it. It's all the things that are related to how you handle corrective actions in your system. So that definition is that whole kit and caboodle. Whereas instances are really more the records. So the instance, you're going to start an instance or initiate an instance anytime you need to create a record. And that record is going to be then like the filled in form. So once you go to actually work on that, whatever the process is, here corrective action, then the instance is one record of that or one incident of corrective action that you're going to be working on. So let's dig a little bit more into how those actually are set up here. So again, I'm going to start out with the definition access. You can see here with this particular workflow, like Tim was mentioning, corrective action is something that you probably want to involve the whole company or organization in. So we've got this definition access set to all users, have view security and edit security. So what that means for this particular or any workflow definition, view security, again to the definition, is allowing them to see this, what we're looking at here, this whole thing, all the behind the scenes stuff. Now,
Yeah,
one
correct. That
place,
the admin side of the
yeah, the
workflow.
admin side, exactly. And one thing here is if you don't have administration for workflow or workflow administration permission, you can't even get to what Tim is showing you that workflows, then it doesn't matter if you have view security. So even though we've got all users set here, we know that all the users in the system do not have that permission. So they're not even going to be able to get to this page in the first place. But
Yeah, the way I like to think of this is we're saying all users with workflow administration, right? Because you
exactly.
have to have that to get here, and then anybody who can get here, any user that can get to this page will be able to view and edit this workflow.
And that's exactly where those two keys really come into place, because your first key is that permission. Your second key is now that you have view security. Um, Go ahead, Tim. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so with this one, you know, we're saying everybody, because all quality managers who are, you know, part of this organization may need to be able to come in here and update some things about how the corrective action works, right? So if we want to take a look at another one, and I'll just pull up this change order, you can kind of explain why this one might be set up a little bit differently.
Yeah, exactly. So in this particular case, you've got really specific people who are allowed to view and make changes to this workflow. So again, you have to have that permission to be able to get to here in the first place. But even with that permission, this is limited to system admins and the manufacturing quality manager, because this is not something that the rest of the organization uses. This is something only the manufacturing side of the house uses. So we don't want other users or groups to be able to view or modify that.
Yeah, so
And
if I wanted to kind of demo this, if I was a forensics admin, right? So I have administrative permission to go to workflows, but I'm a forensic admin, not a manufacturing one. When I go here, I won't see that definition here at all, right? That change order one is gone, and I am not allowed to see or edit it.
yeah, and that's
You
specifically because you don't have view access to that workflow definition.
Exactly. And you could, you know, you could just make it not editable. So you could allow them to still see it here, and they could know that that exists, but they wouldn't be able to make any changes to it, which is a pretty common setup, especially for system admins who maybe you've got one or two people who edit the workflows, but everybody else, you want them to kind of be able to see and understand what's going on. You could leave it view only and allow them to come in here to do that. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
think that's a really good point for the difference between the edit capability versus the view capability. You might want to be able to allow people, a larger group of people, to be able to see what's going on behind the scenes and how it's set up, but not be able to make changes to it. You want to lock down the ability to make changes to a particular workflow or set of workflows. And so the only people who are going to have edit security are going to be those groups that, should really be modifying them.
yeah,
And in case you
exactly.
guys haven't noticed yet, Tim and I are, we're doing this really informally. So there's going to be times where we just get really excited about explaining stuff. So we are, gonna, we're purposely interrupting each other when the need arises. So
Yeah,
just
we're
want
going to
to
treat this more like a conversation. So it should be
yeah,
fun for you guys, but
hopefully.
also just fun for us because we don't do formal very well.
No, we don't. All right, so then let's go over to the instance access. So this is a little bit different. We talked about, how this handled with the definition, the whole kit and caboodle. Now, when we're talking about instance access, this is a little bit of a different situation when you're talking about viewing instances. This is those records now. So if you want people to be able to view all of the records within a system, and we'll get into very specific and a little bit more granular discussion about responsible parties later. But right now we're just talking about all the records that are out there for this particular workflow definition. If you want them to have instance access, this is where you would set up that view. And then what they can do from here, so these groups, we've got system admins, all the users that he's got listed all of here through here. This means that all of these users in the system are going to be able to look up through a search or reports. If they have access to the reports in the first place, they can run a report. Again, no permissions, just having security to the reports. They would be able to run an existing report that they had security to view, and they would be able to see the records for that. So here's an example of all those records showing up. Now, if I'm someone who does not have instance access, what I'm going to see when I run that exact same report is that there's no records. So records may exist, but I don't have the capability of seeing that. So here we see it's just the manufacturing quality manager and the system admins who have view instance access here, view security instance for the instance access. So those are the only ones who are going to be able to see in a search or in a report the individual instances for this workflow.
Yeah, so if I was again a forensic customer and I, was given access to a change order report over here, which the reports and workflows have different security settings, so we won't go into much of that, but we could talk about it at a later one if you wanted. But even if I could see a report that said change order and it was pulling data from that workflow, if I wasn't in here, I still wouldn't see data, even though I could access that report, which is a pretty key feature.
Yeah.
The only people who are here are going to be able to pull that data. So, yep, that's all just instance access. Who can see completed workflows? They need to be in this column here in order to pull that info. So with this one, it's just manufacturing. They can view it. If we go back to that corrective action one, we've got it set up a little bit differently where, and I broke it out so you could plainly see it, right? Not only does our system admin have access, but then each individual section also has access to it so that they can run reports.
And Tim mentioned one thing that I kind of want to really pick out there, and that is the completed records. So this is actually being able to view those records when they are completed, as well as the records anytime throughout the process,
Yep.
that they would be able to look at those instances at any point in the process, regardless, again, of permissions or any responsible party that is associated with it. And the last thing here for the instance access, just want to talk about the edit completed workflows option. This is a pretty powerful thing that you probably do not want to give access to a lot of people, but and certainly not for a lot of workflows either. But if you do have workflows where you might want to be able to make changes at that last step, or once it's closed rather, to any of the information in there, then you can give the edit security at the instance access to be able to make a change to a completed workflow once it's already closed. This does require that that close step, however named, that end step in your process does have those fields as editable. So in this case, if they're just all viewable, it doesn't matter that we just gave them edit security. They're not going to be able to do anything. But now, if we make these changes and save our changes here where we've got some fields that are editable, then we can, if we had one of these and it was, online and completed, that cannabis quality manager would be able to go, anyone in that group would be able to go to a completed record, completed instance, and make changes to those specific fields that Tim just marked as editable.
Yeah, and I can show that real quick.
It's great.
And if I can spell cannabis correctly. Yeah, so if we were to go to a report on any of those corrective actions and run it, look at one of these past ones, you'll see that those fields that I selected are editable. And that's because I'm logged in as that quality manager group. So let me take you back there real quick and show you that. Because, again, this isn't something that we're going to want to give to all users, right? We wouldn't want anybody to be able to go in and change a record. So we've got our cannabis users are all in there that they can view data. But maybe, our quality manager wants to be able to correct records if something was entered incorrectly, right? Then you could put their group in specifically and say, okay, that person or people can now edit those specific fields at the end. So yeah, pretty cool little feature if you need to be able to do that. Just go edit that workflow and update the information that you need updated.
Cool. So I think we're ready to talk about how responsible parties now play a role in these individual, how you set it up at the definition, but then they play a role in the individual instances as well, and how the access gets even more granular here.
Yeah, let me go. I'm going to go undo that change that I just made real quick so we can get ourselves back to where we were. And just remove that out real quick because we don't want those to be editable. Another key feature, if you do have these editable at close, but nobody's in that column, of course, they won't be able to edit those. So no harm in having them editable if they're not able to. Okay, put that back. Actually, I don't need that online. We just need this offline so I can keep talking about it. All right, so we've talked about instance and definition access, right? This is for the entire workflow. We're talking about, like, with definitions, that's here, what we can edit. Instance access is all of the instances, right? Same thing, kind of, when we start talking about responsible parties, right? If we're looking at steps over here on the left-hand side, and we're trying to determine who is going to be involved with these, that is really, if we're setting it up here, going to be set up for the entire workflow. Right? Any corrective action that we need to fill out is going to follow what we assign here at each individual step. Now, let's start by talking at step one, because step one acts a little bit differently than all of the rest of them, right? If we're looking at the responsible party of a workflow, step one determines who is allowed to initiate that particular workflow. Okay, and initiate means click on workflows right here, click on the workflow you want to start. It'll show up in your list if you are in step one of that workflow as an RP. Okay, so let me go back and I'll show you how we've got this set up real quick. On the corrective action one, right? If we look at step one, in our RPs, we're saying anybody who is in any of these groups, so any of our individual companies inside, right? All of our available people are all allowed to initiate this workflow. Okay, so if I put this online, regardless of who I'm logged in as for this system, if I click workflows, I will see the corrective action there. So same thing if I log in again as manufacturing, right? If I go here, click on workflows, I can initiate that corrective action because I'm an RP on step one. Okay, so anybody you want to be responsible for starting a workflow, put them as an RP in step one, they will have it here that they can click on and start that workflow. Now, let me show you one that's set up differently so you can see what it means if you're not in there, right? That change order workflow that we were talking about just a second ago, just like our instance access with reporting, we want only our manufacturing company users to be able to initiate change orders, right? Because it's not relevant to any other section or any other company, right? So if I log in as manufacturing, I'll be able to initiate this. But if I log in as any of my other users, they will not be able to. So let me put this online. I am system admin, right? That's my user. So if I go to workflows, I have change order. If I log out and log in as forensics, right? That one is not a group that's RP on step one. So when I go here, I do not have a change order process to initiate. So all you're doing with controlling who's allowed to start these is determining that first step, who is RP on step one. And then that tells the system, okay, if they're there, they can come here and initiate that workflow.
And I think
Anything you
just to
want to, oh,
throw in, I'm
sorry, I was
sorry.
going to say anything you want to add there, but you just
Yeah.
jumped right in.
Yeah,
You
perfect.
read my mind.
Mind melt. Um, the one thing I was going to throw in is actually that this is a little bit more advanced, but if you're working with launched workflows, this is kind of interesting because let's say you have a workflow that launches another workflow, like an internal audit where launches a corrective action. In a system or a situation rather like that, you have corrective actions yeah, he's showing an example here where we've got audits launch corrective actions. So in the case of a corrective action being launched by the internal or the audit, then we've got it where the responsible party is set to the primary workflow initiator. So in this case, that would be whoever initiated that audit is also going to be the person responsible for the first step of the corrective action. But in the corrective action workflow, we've actually got it set up to all users or all the, the users in the system could initiate it. So in that particular case, obviously we don't want this internal audit when it launches a corrective action, we don't want it to go to everybody in the system. We want it just to go to that primary workflow initiator. So same kind of situation. Let's just change it a little bit. Let's just say that instead of primary, we actually want it to be the quality manager who gets that. So the director of quality in this case is the one who's going to see those corrective actions at the first step. So in this case, we've got it launches from an audit, it goes to corrective action. The director of quality is going to handle that corrective action. But everyone in the organization still going to be able to see when they go to workflows to initiate a workflow, they'll still be able to see the corrective action from there. So it's just a way to be able to set that initiator very specifically if you've got a workflow that is getting launched from another workflow, but it's also an independent standalone workflow. Now, it's a little bit different when you have a situation where you don't even want it to be an independent standalone workflow. Let's say you've got something that launches from another workflow and it should always only launch. Like you've got a scheduler set up. You don't want it to ever be initiated manually. You can actually do a little trick here where the responsible party here at the launch step is set up correctly to who you want that person or group to be. But in the workflow itself, you could set it up to be a system admin or a dummy group so that no one is going to be able to see that workflow landing page on the left-hand side.
Mhm.
I'm going to click on that. No one's going to be able to see that second workflow, that launched workflow from in here. So it's going to be kind of hidden because it can't be initiated by a person. It's only initiated by an automation.
Yeah, and that was going to be what I was going to mention is who you set up in, and I'm just going to go back to what you just set up there. If we remember that corrective action can be initiated by anybody, but if we go, let's say instead of the corrective action, this was the change order, right, which can only be initiated by manufacturing users. If I set the RP though as my forensic quality manager, this launch will override that security and it will give it to them even though they don't have instance access or they're not RP on the first step. Right. So this launch will give the person access that needs that. So like Susie mentioned, if we have this hidden, if we have the corrective action hidden to where it can only be initiated from a launch and not by an individual, you would just determine who the RP is here, and the RP, the system will handle giving it to that person, even though they can't normally see it. So lots of options that you can do with this launch based on how you want that configured. All right, so RP step one, you determine that here, whoever is in this list will be able to click workflows and go start that process. It's pretty simple. Now, moving forward from here, every time we go to another subsequent step, whoever is designated as responsible party is who does that thing. Okay, so it's no longer, you know, who can initiate and who's available over here. Now we're directly doing the process. So if I initiate the primary audit and then we send that over to start planning and preparing it, whoever is set up as RP on this field is who will get it. And I think it's important here to talk through some of the options because depending on who you pick, it either affords or takes away some flexibility. And I think this is where we're getting to the actual question of what Leah Ray said, which was, you know, how do I make sure that it's going to the right group of people at the right time, right? So if I, in fact, I'm going to do this with the corrective action one because I think it's easier to follow than this audit one. So let me go back here and take this offline. So if we have somebody who, oh shoot, I don't even think I want to use this one. See, we're doing it live. We're just doing this off the top of our heads.
Doing it live means.
Yeah, so let's do it off of this non-conformance because I think this is really easy to see exactly what we mean. So if we're doing non-conformances, right, and we've got the ability of anybody to report an issue, right? Anybody in this system can come in and report a potential non-conformance. Then we need that reviewed, right? So how do we make sure that depending on what was submitted, it gets reviewed by the right person, especially in a multi-company or multi-section setup, right? Let's talk about what happens by default. So here is who can start it. And then if I do my review step, there's a lot of options. We wouldn't, of course, want it to be the initiator because we don't want people reviewing their own non-conformances. The most common setup is director of quality, right? Or a quality manager. So anybody submits one, it immediately goes to a designated person to complete that task and review it, right? Always goes to this same person every single time, regardless of what is entered here. So this is great for smaller organizations that maybe have a smaller quality team or just an individual that reviews these. They can designate that person here and then have it set up to always go to them.
And that could also be, just throwing it in, that could also be a group. I mean, he's got it selected as a group, not an individual. It just happens to have maybe one person in it, but it could be a group with multiple people, and it's going to go to all of those people who are within that group. Or he can select multiple groups, and it's going to go to all of those people within all of those groups.
Exactly. And that's a good segue into the next possible situation, which would be you have non-conformances that are sent to like a panel of people, right? Multiple quality managers or multiple individual sections, and then one of them would grab it and review it, right? So here we've got 4 possible quality managers that could all come in here and say, all right, well, I'm looking at this one. I think we need to do this. not a whole lot of automation here, right? We're not designating, these types go to this particular person. This is just whoever gets to it first will decide. You can, of course, on the route that's leaving this step, you'll determine how many of those responsible parties need to complete it, whether it's one or all of them. And you'll just want to decide that based on your own internal business rules. So since we've got 4, would probably just want one of them to review it, unless you are requiring that all 4 of them do it, then you would click all and have that as your route responsible or your route requirement. But again, that's all hard coded. So every single nonconformance, when it gets submitted, will go to these 4 people, right? Again, not a lot of flexibility there. So it'll always go to them. You can't really change it. One of them will have to grab it and do it. So what do we do if we want a little bit more control over what's happening? And I'm just going to remove all of those out and start over. So if we've got anybody submitting them, how do I get a little bit more control over which specific person I want to review that? And the answer is, of course, custom fields, right? So if I'm asking within the workflow for a person's name, right? So here we're filling out the issue. It's going to be reviewed, and we're asking for the name of a person to complete a step. We could do that up here at the beginning, right? So if I'm filling out a nonconformance, I know who my manager is, or who my section leader is, or my quality manager. I can then pick that person from a list and say, okay, I need you specifically to go do that. And in that case, your RP would be that custom field value. So that would be over here. We would add them in. And now when we get to this step, after I've filled out my form, it's going to go to who I selected in that dropdown. That, of course, is just a listing of people by default. Right? This custom field, when I create it, is just going to pull in all users and all groups. So what I would want to do is limit that selection of who is allowed to be picked in that group to a specific group or a specific person. And that's all done through the custom field itself. So I can open that in a new tab, go to that custom field, which is the personnel, and personnel responsible for cause analysis plan. And right down here, we can restrict that group to any number of groups, right? So I could say, only show me all of the quality managers, or only allow for, I don't know, we'll pick all personnel, right? So now we're removing the groups out, but you have to pick a person. And then we could allow for multi-select if we want more than one person to review that. So
the example, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
A good example of this that you might want to have is, let's say you have an internal audit type of workflow, and you have people who are actually trained to be lead auditors, or qualified to be lead auditors. You can say, like, select the lead auditor. And if you don't have memorized who all those people might actually be, then you could limit this to, a group that you created that are qualified lead auditors. So then, this group just contains those individual folks, and then you limit it down to only those people who are within that group. So it just kind of helps take the guesswork out, especially, when you do have these larger organizations as well. That can be really useful.
Yeah, so like for that example, I just made a group real quick and then added 3. Let me refresh that real quick. Oop, wrong button. So I just added 3 people who would be our qualified lead auditors. And so back to that custom field, if we were to, let's say that was the name of the field that we wanted to restrict, we would go there and then limit it just to our available lead auditors. And they would be the only ones that could be selected from that list. Same thing with cause analysis plan, right? If we had 5 people who were qualified to do root cause analysis, I could have them in a group and only have them as responsible for that next step. That will then limit who is allowed to be selected here, and it removes out some of that, I guess, just, error in selecting the wrong person. What it does do, though, is it allows for a fully custom for each individual instance, right? So each nonconformance, instead of being routed the same exact way every single time, each instance is now unique. So when I get to step 2, this is going to be done by different people depending on, who entered it, who they selected for it to be reviewed by, and so forth. And then you could throw in another step, right? If you wanted to verify that whoever did it correctly, especially in a multi section or a multi company type of a structure, you might want the director of quality to have a final say. So you would throw another step in here and have it hard coded to go to the director of quality as the RP. Okay. Let me remove that. And I'm going to go back to our workflows and show you what that means as we go along each individual workflow, though. So if we've got that corrective action, excuse me, and we go here, again, step 1, who can initiate, and then each individual step after that is who is going to be doing it. And you'll see here's a custom field where we've selected here who is going to go do that action plan. It then gets reviewed. For this demo site, we've got it set to initiator so we can demo that. But of course, you're going to want that on reviewing a corrective action plan to be like a director of quality level, right? So that's all we're doing is determining who each individual step goes to. If you need the flexibility of it depending on what's being filled out, use a custom field. If you know it's the same person every single time, set that group as responsible party through the group here. Custom fields are over here. Personnel is here. Workflow initiator is going to be down here if you want to add them back in as an RP.
And that's what it means by that custom field too. I don't know if you pointed that out, but the custom field column down below, or column heading down below there where it says custom field false, that's just showing you whether or not it is a, it is a group within your system versus you create or you're using a personnel custom field for here.
Yeah, and so that one says true, right? Because this is a custom field that's asked in the workflow that we're pulling in as the RP. Anything else you'd want to add there, Susie, on the RPs?
I don't know if we wanted to talk about smart restrictions at all. There is I don't know that we want to get into the details of it, but you could use smart restrictions also to narrow down who can be selected from a group. So it might be, based on, like Tim was saying before, let's say this is a corrective action. You've got lots of sections or disciplines or areas, divisions within an organization. Maybe once they choose what division that they're in, then that could actually limit who they see as the potentials to choose from. So it just limits down, it restricts down who's in that custom field group based on a choice that they've made earlier in the workflow or earlier on that particular step that they're on. So
yeah. So like here we've got source as a list field value, and our source values, they're pretty generic sources for where corrective actions come from. But let's say, for instance, this one came from customer feedback, and you've got like we internally have a customer experience team, right? So if we've got feedback coming from customers, we want that group of people to go, figure out what happened and contact them and start moving forward with it. So we could say within smart restrictions that if I select customer feedback, then when it gets time to come down here and pick somebody to do our root cause analysis, that we're only going to display people who are in that group, right? Or a select number of people that are on our customer experience team, because that's where it came from. Same thing with any of these others, right? So if it was from a proficiency test, maybe we want the section leader to do it. So we would have only section leaders available to figure out what went wrong there. So smart restrictions, that's all done over here in the admin section. If you haven't ever done them before, I'd encourage you to look at the help guide. They're very simple. They're just if this, then that statements, and we could dig into them at a later time if you wanted to see it. But otherwise, very handy to help you, limit even further who is going to be that RP on that workflow.
I think one other thing I just wanted to touch on too was one other thing for initiators that you set in here. When you have an initiator or someone responsible party for the first step, they are also responsible for pushing that route button forward and moving it to the next step. But one more unique thing is that they will have that workflow in their inbox, regardless if they're never a responsible party again. So if we, start out this workflow, it's going to show up in this particular user Ryan's inbox, and regardless of Ryan's security or permissions, he's going to see this particular instance of the corrective action workflow that he initiated through the life of that corrective action. So the entire time he's going to be able to see that, as regardless if he's got a step he needs to be responsible for, or he's just the initiator of it. So even at subsequent steps, he'll see this. And that's by design so that, Ryan can see the process. He's got visibility to where it is in the process and knows, like, who to go ask if it's at a step that he's not responsible for.
Yeah, and so I just initiated that one and saved it. And so you'll see, it's sitting here in my inbox, and then it also tells me that I initiated this one down here. And as I push this forward to somebody else to review, which hopefully I filled out all of my fields. Yep. It will go to that person, of course, but then it's going to sit here in my inbox and kind of keep me up to date on what's going on. They can always, because they've got it here, they can always click on it and open it up and see it in that view only and see what's being worked on, right? So just be aware of that. Because they initiate, they can see the information going on with it. That also means, because we've granted them that instance access to this one instance, even if they're not in the ability or in that instance access column of the definition. Let me go back over. Oops, I clicked on the wrong thing. Let me go back here to the workflow while I explain this. Even if I am not here in the instance access column, right? This column grants me access to every instance that workflow has ever been run. If I'm not here, but I have started workflows and I have access to a report, I can report on workflows that I initiated, right? Because it's granting me that instance access here, and I can stay on top of those. So if I've run 4 of them, I can go to a report on corrective actions and see those 4 only with nothing else.
Same thing for the searching as well. You should be able to see those instances in your searching.
Yeah.
And one other point to this too, if again, a little bit more advanced, if you use launches, any workflows that are launched from other workflows, if you initiated workflow A, the very first workflow, then you're going to be able to see all of the other workflows, regardless if you're ever involved in them. So keep that in mind if you don't want people to be able to see subsequent workflows, that you do not want to have them launched from another workflow, because that person who's initiating workflow A is going to be able to see workflow B, workflow C, etc.
Correct. Cool.
People also ask sometimes about the difference between collaborators and responsible parties. The only difference there is that collaborators can edit everything in the step in which they're a collaborator, but they just can't push the workflow forward to the next step. So that's the only difference, is that it's going to show up in their inbox. You can also send them notifications when things are assigned to them as a collaborator, but ultimately it's only going to show who the responsible party is for that workflow, and the responsible party or parties are the only ones who are going to be able to push that workflow to the next step. So you can have collaborators in there when you want people, maybe you want someone in a corrective action to be able to give you some additional, information, put their information in on what they think was involved in the root cause, but then the director of quality or the quality manager is going to be the only one, or the final say, directly, and they can modify anything that was chosen or written in by the collaborator before moving it forward.
Yeah, there's a pretty common thing that I hear a lot from people who they want individual sections or individual labs to be able to, come to their own conclusions, but they just want visibility into what's happening. And so they'll do something like this, where a director of quality can, see what's going on and maybe even comment within the workflow about what's happening, but it's really the responsibility of each individual quality manager or lab or section to do their own work, right? So this is a pretty common one, just as an oversight mechanism, or it could be reversed, right? Where you want input from each individual quality manager, but it's really the director of quality's final say, and they would be up here as the RP instead. So it really just depends on who you want to be making that final decision and pushing the button as it's complete or reviewed or submitted, or however you've got that set up. Cool. What else we got, Susie?
I think that was it for the workflows and responsible parties and initiators.
Yeah, so really we're not going to go into that level of detail on the documents. We do want to talk about a couple of things, because with workflows, as you've seen, there's really only one real permission that kind of messes with how things are viewed. And that's going to be this alter all workflow instances permission. And then, of course, the ability to create and alter reports, right? All of that stuff will affect how you see data. But really, everything in a workflow is set up within the workflow itself, right? Who can access data, who can edit the definition, who performs the work at each step. That's all determined through the workflow itself. On documents, there are more permissions that come into play, and there are also less areas for you to really have to worry about as far as editing, right? So we'll kind of touch on a few of these very quickly, but just to kind of give you guys an idea, we always are going to recommend, no matter what, that you always start with view and edit security on folders before you ever go touch administrative permissions for your end users, right? Admin permissions override any security that you have, and pretty much everything can be done just through security on folders themselves. So in this case, we've got multiple folders for multiple locations, and some that need to be viewed by all, right? This folder needs to be viewed by everybody. So if we go look at its properties on security, we've got all visitors, all users, right? Everybody can see that folder regardless of who logs in. And that's just on the security tab. We determine which groups are going to be in there. If we go look at our forensic lab, right, go to folder properties, security is going to be different, right? Just our forensic quality manager and our forensic laboratory users, right? Those are the only two groups that can see and edit this folder. Now, you're probably thinking, now, wait a second, Tim, Ryan is not in either of these groups, right? How come he can see it? And that's because of Ryan's permissions, right? He's an admin. He has a very specific permission that overrides all of these view and edit security settings. So again, don't give admin permissions. Always stick to here before you ever go touching admin, because admin will override what you set up here. That's easy enough. You just focus on who needs to view, who needs to edit, and you just go folder by folder and set that up. You can also change that for individual documents, right? Folder is the place to start. Then we look at an individual document. And if I want to change it to where it's different than anybody else, we go to properties, we go to security, and we set the security different, right? I would just uninherit it, and then I can start making changes, remove out the editability by certain people or add in more. However you want that to work, we would just change it here. The last thing we'll mention is just, of course, who performs the work within the document itself, or the document control lifecycle. That's all going to be through the document list tab. and you're just determining that on approvers and reviewers, all within groups, right? So this should probably mirror somewhat the security on the document. Mostly editors could be involved in the review and approval process. And then you're probably bringing in more high-level people to do approval and review on this. I know that's super quick. We're not getting into any of the nuance here, but if you need any additional help here, feel free to ask those questions and pass them on along to us. Anything you want to add to that, Susie? Do you want to talk about any of the permissions to avoid, or you feel like that's pretty good?
I think I think we're good there. I think if we want to bring up that slide again, I was just going to kind of plug one more time for, anybody who watches this webinar and wants to likes this or has any feedback, really any feedback for us at all, but also has any other topics you'd like or any other questions to answer, then please do email this. If you've already asked a question and we haven't necessarily touched on it, we'll be in touch with you via email, but just know that the rest of those we're kind of processing through and determining how we might be able to talk about them. So would love to hear your feedback, your input on how we can make this better, because we enjoy it and we enjoy helping you guys out and using the products the best to your the organization's capabilities and needs.
Yeah, and I'll add too, this one specifically was very focused on like individual properties and what those change. They don't all have to be like that, right? You don't just have to ask questions about how to set up, a particular workflow so that somebody can edit it. Anything is on game for us, right? We like to be challenged, both Susie and I. We very much enjoy you guys asking us how to do something and us having to go figure it out. So if you've got something that you have been trying for a long time to figure out how to do in Qualtrics, or you've got an idea for a workflow and you just want to see what it would look like, send those things to us too. We like a good challenge, and yeah, try to stump us. It'll be fun for us.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much, especially to you, Susie. This was fun for me, and
fun for me.
Yeah, looking forward to doing more of these. Send your questions in, and if you have anything else, don't feel like you can't contact us. We'd love to hear from you guys. So let us know what you need, and we'll be here to try to help. So thank you very much, and we'll see you guys next time. Yep. Bye.
Bye.